Hello, and welcome to Roy's Book Reviews. In this week's video, I'm going to be making a bit of a departure from the videos I have filmed so far. In prior book review videos, I have discussed my thoughts on novels that I've read, and also one work of nonfiction, a biography of Harry Houdini. All of those books were written for adults. Today, I am going to review 3 books of children's literature. I have read a good bit of children's literature, starting from books written for young children, up until books written for young readers, young adult novels. Because I have a 13-year-old daughter, so for the last, not all of the last 13 years, because for the last few years she's been doing her own reading. But when she was younger, I was doing a good bit of reading to her on a nightly basis. And I am going to be discussing my thoughts on 3 of those books today. I'm going to turn off this music, Water Me Down by Vagabond, and I am going to get into my review of the first book, which is a classic. It is in the canon of great children's literature. 2 of the 3 books I am going to discuss today definitely fall into that category. The third, I'm not quite sure if it's in the canon, but I believe it's definitely a beloved classic. I will get to it momentarily, but right now I would like to talk about Mary Poppins by P.L. Travers. I knew from the movie, and I'm not referring to the movie adaptation of Mary Poppins that we all know and love from back in the day. I guess it was the 60s or maybe 70s when that movie was made, or the much more recent adaptation, which was also very enjoyable. I'm referring to the movie Saving Mr. Banks, which is an excellent movie starring Thomas Hanks, if you want to call him that, which is about the making of the movie Mary Poppins and how the author P.L. Travers felt about it. And she was basically allowing her book to be made into a film by Disney, and she was dealing directly with Walt Disney, who was around at that time, because she had financial troubles and she needed the cash. She was not a huge fan of Walt Disney because she knew that he tended to dumb down stories to make them appealing to youngest members of the audience, and she felt that her character, Mary Poppins, in the books that she's featured in are a bit more sophisticated than Walt Disney could handle. But money often wins out, so she decided to let him make the movie, and he made a fantastic movie. And of course, being Walt Disney, he did the Walt Disney thing, and it's definitely quite a bit different from the book. And since I only knew of the story from the movie, I found the reading of the book to be a bit jarring and a bit of a surprise, because I didn't realize, even having seen Saving Mr. Banks, I didn't realize how much different the movie and the book Mary Poppins are from each other. So I knew from Saving Mr. Banks that a personality overhaul was given to Mary Poppins when Disney adapted the book into a film. She's all sweetness and light in the film, but quite the hard ass in the book. She's rather vain in the book as well. Though I suppose I'd be vain too, if I could fit furniture into a suitcase and fly by umbrella and do all the wonderful magical things that Mary Poppins is capable of, including having a wonderful singing voice in both of the movies. I learned from Wikipedia after reading this book, shortly after, that the reason so much that happens in the movie is not in the book because there are 8 Mary Poppins books, and the original movie is based on events taken from the first 4 books, plus the stuff that Disney threw in to make it as Disney as possible. I can't say that I love this classic book that spawned a much more charming movie, as well as the very charming remake. I gave it 3 stars in my review on Goodreads that I just read from. To be honest, it felt kind of like a 2-star review to me, just based on the merits of the book itself. If I was comparing it to other works of children's literature, either ones that I'd read to my daughter or ones that were read to me or that I had read when I was young, this to me was a little bit below average. But since Mary Poppins is such, an amazing character who stood the test of time, spawned wonderful movies, and when you say Mary Poppins, you automatically have an image of what she means to you, kind of like a Peter Pan. I mean, she's just a character that once you have met her, you'll never forget her. So that is a credit to the writing of P.L. Travers, as well as to Walt Disney. Both versions of Mary Poppins very interesting. You have to bow down and give credit to the original, and that's the one in the book by P.L. Travers. I recommend seeing the movies. You can read the books if you like, but the books are the book. I only read the first. I won't be reading the following 7. This is a different tone than the movies, and I prefer the tone of the movies which are much lighter and whimsical and fun. But the element of magic and of taking care of children and helping them to become the adults they need to become is present, in the film versions as well as the versions on page. Second book I am going to discuss is one I was not familiar with from my own youth, but as an adult I heard about it, and I was curious about it, and I decided to read it aloud to my daughter. I am talking about Madeleine L'Engle, however you say her name. Her novel, A Wrinkle in Time. I read this book probably a couple of years before the movie adaptation by Ava DuVernay came out. I'm a big fan of Ava DuVernay. So is my daughter, who's also named Ava. So even though we were not overwhelmed by the book, we were nonetheless excited to see the movie when it came out. But I'm here to talk about the book. There are young adult classics that dazzle no matter when in life a reader comes across them. And then there are those that one needs to be young to fully appreciate, or so it seems. If discovered too late in life, those in the latter category will fail to impress. I'm putting A Wrinkle in Time in the latter group. A lofty reputation preceded, but when I finally got around to reading it, I simply failed to see what all the fuss is about. Yet, if my theory is accurate, then my daughter, who it was read aloud to, would have enjoyed it considerably more than I did. She did not. We were both underwhelmed, to be honest, though we were in agreement that it got better as it went along, and we became used to the space age setting. I am dazzled by the best of science fiction because of the level of imagination required to create a new world from scratch. Among the earliest books that I became enamored of, the books that I credit for inspiring me not only to be a lifelong reader, but also to try my hand at writing someday myself, were books by Jules Verne. Journey to the Center of the Earth, Around the World in 80 Days, books like that. It's definitely science fiction in nature. So I, got my teeth into reading through works of science fiction, and A Wrinkle in Time is in that category of children's literature, but I didn't find it as mesmerizing and fascinating as I did the works of Jules Verne. I will go back to my review here at Goodreads, where I wrote that I would not call A Wrinkle in Time science fiction at its best. I'll stick with writers such as Philip K. Dick for that. I feel kind of bad almost that I didn't enjoy this book more than I did because I know it's such a beloved classic. A great many readers will enthusiastically recommend this book to you, which is how it got to be a classic in the first place. And I think you should take their word at it rather than mine in this case, because majority wins, and most people, or plenty of people, declared this book to be great. So there's something in it that most people see that I don't, so fine, go with their opinion. But I'm here to give you mine. Take them at their word, and perhaps you will agree with them more than you do with my review. And that's totally fine with me. That's about all I have to say. My daughter did enjoy the movie A Wrinkle in Time, and she also enjoyed Hope Larson's graphic novel edition of it. She loves graphic novels in general, and she found the experience of reading it on her own in graphic novel form more interesting and engaging than my reading the original novel to her. The third book I am going to discuss is Happy Birthday, Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle. Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle is a character in a children's book series I was not familiar with in my childhood, but my wife did grow up on these books. So when I found this one in the library, I decided to give it a shot. Actually, I read another Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle book first, and then I read this one. And apparently the first one I read was written back in the 1950s by Betty MacDonald, who is the author and creator of the character Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle. But Happy Birthday, Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle was written years later and is comprised of a previously unpublished story and ideas for other stories that were found by her daughter. Each of the Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle books are not a single story, but a collection of stories that are all center around this magical woman, somewhat, kind of Mary Poppins-ish, I guess, and that she can, do the impossible. The story outlines were fleshed out into new installments in the franchise. My daughter Ava, who's 8 years old at the time I read this book to her, immediately picked up the more contemporary feel of this book compared to the one we read previously by Betty MacDonald. And as it turns out, we both liked this one better than the older one. Perhaps because of the modernity, perhaps for some other reason. That is a credit to Anne MacDonald Canham, who is the daughter of Betty MacDonald and the person who put this book together. So perhaps for some reason, that is a credit to her. This book somehow just was more appealing than the truly authentic Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle books that we previously read. There was one story in particular. It was about a kid who was too cautious to attempt anything, from something legitimately intimidating like climbing a tree to merely playing basketball with friends. I mean, he was just terrified of everything. We found that one to be a bit of a dud. Other than that, we were charmed throughout this book. The concept of a woman with magical cures for annoying childhood behavior and vices is a timeless winner. So I can see why these books, the originals as well as newer entries, charm multiple generations of readers. So those are my thoughts on Happy Birthday, Mrs. Piggle-Wiggle, and A Wrinkle in Time, and Mary Poppins. Maybe you've read them all. Maybe you haven't gotten to any of them yet. I hope you found my thoughts on them interesting. And I will leave you with a little bit more music by Vagabond as I close out this week's installment of Roy's Book Reviews.